Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, wherever you happen to be. This is Mike Thompson with Judy Reedy, and this is our very first conversation of Coach and Coach for today's webinar for CAC. So welcome for joining us, or thank you for joining us, and welcome. Judy, this is kind of a unique thing that we're doing because as far as I'm concerned, I'm not sure that there's been a high-performance coach that's recorded anything with their coach.
No, I think it's a first for me, Mike.
All
So
right.
this is going to be fun.
This will be fun, and we are recording this as a live webinar, so things do tend to go wrong. And typically, we don't usually use slides in the background. It's not something that we do, but we figured that this will be a little bit more engaging if we do have some visuals for people to focus on.
Well, the other thing too, Mike, as we were talking is there's some stuff that you and I have done like on a scratch pad or some frameworks that I've shared with you that now is kind of conscious or knowledge that you and I both have that we thought we should make visible to everybody else so they understand why or what we're talking about.
Okay. To give everyone some context, Judy and I started working with each other through the Canada Coach Program with On the Podium, the Coaching Enhancement Program. Judy did a session, I believe, in May of 2018, and it went really, really, really well for me. It was one of the things that really reached me and spoke to me in the moment. And as a result, Judy and I decided to work together to try to enhance the emotional intelligence part of my job. And it's not something that coaches typically think about. I think coaches a lot of times think they have to be strong and tough and my way is the highway, or my way or the highway. But Judy kind of taught me another way to view that. And we've worked together quite a few times between April 2018 and October 2018 and April 2019. And we call each other every so often to throw around ideas that we've been thinking about in this realm. And we thought that maybe we'd put some of these into a webinar so anyone watching at home, any coaches watching at home, could maybe add these things to their toolbox.
Cool.
So today we're going to go through our conversation today is going to be around how mindset matters. The change is here right now. COVID-19 has changed a lot of things, and I think a lot of people are thinking about how things will go back to normal, and I'm just not sure that normal is the right word to use. And how you have your influence and impact into this new world that we're going to enter.
And if I can add to that, Mike, I think part of this is summarizing even some of the text back and forth we've done over the last, 6 to 8 weeks and some of the conversations that we've had. So it's kind of a bit of a summary and an invitation to other coaches to imagine what else is possible.
Agreed.
Okay. So this is where we make something invisible visible. So as a coach, everything I do and teach is in the context of neuroscience and emotional intelligence. And EQ as a concept in sport is fairly new. So the definition is at the bottom, kind of our ability to name and notice our thoughts, wants, and feelings in the moment, how much we actually stay curious and care about what's happening for the other person, in your case, an athlete, a peer, a parent. And then actually, how do we stay connected and keep talking rather than reacting and disconnecting? So it's this idea of, or the way I like to explain it, if you think about it in the context of sport or exercise, when the fitter I am, the faster, once I sort of raise my heart rate, the faster I'm able to bring it back to resting is a measure of my fitness. From an EQ standpoint, it's this idea of when I get fired up emotionally, either positive or negative, it's how quickly am I able to actually calm that down so that I can keep connected with you. Most of us tend to avoid conflict, which tends to actually trigger emotion, stress too. And so it's actually our ability to manage that stuff inside of us and kind of keep talking to people. So that's kind of a very quick overview of EQ, this notion of self-awareness, empathy, so understanding others, and then this idea of how are we building connection, trust, respect, team, and a performance environment. That would be my 2 cents in the sporting context.
That does take time, doesn't it, Judy? I mean, a lot of coaches are kind of demanding that respect without actually building the trust that respect drives. That's my notice anyway. If you take a look at a lot of I'll use cooking shows as an example because this is one of the things that tickles me. We watch cooking shows a lot at home here on the Food Network, and chefs go nuts yelling at people, telling them that, that's not the way to do it, and you're useless, and you should fix this. And chefs in the kitchen demand this respect without actually having built that trust first, and it drives me absolutely crazy. I'm not in the cooking industry, obviously, but if I were to do it, I would do it differently, in that I would build the respect first. I would build the trust first, and then demand respect.
So that kind of plays into something that I say regularly. I say leadership is a mindset, not a position. And it builds on exactly what you're saying. And, one of the things I regularly say to folks is, one of the things for me is I believe leadership is a high performance sport, but unlike what we do it with in sport, which is there's a ton of time practicing to get ready for the performance. What a lot of us leaders are doing, or coaches, I'm going to say coaches or leaders, is we're performing all the time. But the thing that we don't have the benefit of is the video playback. So a lot of times in the conversations with coaches is like, how many of you turn the camera on yourself and film yourself, or actually get up in the morning, strap on a GoPro, go about your day, come home, sit down, download it, and say, how did I show up today? Because we all, as human nature, get up and we believe everything we do comes from a good place. But the way our brains are wired and how we see the world, we tend to see what people do to us or with us through a more negative lens. So we all tend to see ourselves better. And I share a story regularly about, my journey into this space was a function of getting feedback through a 360, where I learned that my team, that worked for me many years ago, that I had handpicked, thought was amazing, thought I was doing great stuff, their nickname for me was Dick, short for dictator. Right? And it was devastating. I mean, I won't lie. My first reaction, I always tell, is I wanted to figure out who said it and how I was going to get rid of them. But luckily for me, somebody helped me see that maybe there was some truth in that. And I think that's the challenge for us as coaches and as leaders, is if we don't build a feedback rich environment for ourselves so that we know how we're showing up or how our words land, we don't get better or perform better because we have no feedback. We're operating in a vacuum. And EQ is really about making a commitment to train this muscle, and this muscle, so that the technical, tactical stuff that you guys know so well shines even brighter, or it allows people to learn and perform better faster because they feel safer.
One of the best things that I think I did was inviting you to be with my group last year at our World Championship trials. And the reason I think that was really good is that I don't often in a pressure cooker situation have someone there with a specific goal of giving me some feedback. And really what I wanted to see was how I was showing up and whether or not I was actually as calm and as positive as I thought I was. Because like you said, I think a lot of times we do think things are better, or remember things as being better than they actually were. So I did want you around for that, so that I could actually get some live feedback on how I did without the fear that someone's just patting my ego because they want me to think that I did a good job.
Do you remember how nervous I was to be in that environment?
I do, and I remember how nervous the athletes were. They thought there was some kind of twist to it, trying to understand why you were there. Now they had met you before.
Yeah.
They're trying to think that there was some kind of catch there, that you were evaluating them in some way, because they couldn't get it. They couldn't understand why I would want someone there to give me honest feedback in that pressure cooker situation, which goes to show that it's not a common thing. But we are in a sense role models, and I think that if I can put myself in a position where I'm being evaluated honestly, I think that just allows them to do the same without thinking that there's any judgment there.
Well, it's like I say quite often, people go, what are you in the business of doing? And I said, I actually build role models today who actually help build our next generation even better than what we have. And I mean, so this notion of role models is sort of a concept that's really important to me. And those, like, everybody is a role model. We either have a positive ripple effect or a negative one. And it's really about our awareness. Again, it goes back to EQ. How aware am I about my behavior, what I say and what I do? And what's the example it's setting for others around what's okay or not okay around here? So anyway, this is sort of something that, so here's, if I may, this is the place and space you and I have had interesting conversations, and I have been having this conversation with a lot of my, not only sport clients, but also the ones that work in education and in the corporate sector, this notion of connection. And when I think about sport, and this is sort of my small place and space of it, and you and I have talked about this a couple different ways, but I tend to do this. Okay, like when I think about athletes or kids or young people, I put them in the middle and I say there's three key role models in the lives of our young people: parents, teachers, and coaches. And I'm not always sure that we appreciate coaches the way we could be, or even coaches appreciating the role they play better. And I just see sport as this really important place and space from the time kids start to wherever they are in the pathway. How are we connecting them to themselves and their own potential? How are we connecting and helping them build character in relationship to others, peers, and coaches? But then how do we as coaches actually help them connect to what else is possible? So that's how I see it. I'm curious around, some of the things that come up for you when I say that kind of stuff.
Well, it's interesting that you asked the question. I remember the year after we came back from Tokyo, or from Rio rather. It was a very tough year. The people that did make the team that came back to train in my training center obviously had some time off and came in later than the other people. The people that didn't make the team arrived for school in September and wanted to get training. So I was connecting with them, giving them practices from afar. I hadn't actually seen them yet, and they were training. So when the whole group came back together in early October, the problem that we had was that I was coming from a previous group that was much older. I mean, the athletes were late 20s, early 30s, and they were all, they just wanted to do their own thing. They had 1 year. What didn't make sense for me to change much of what they were doing. We just wanted to get through that year as best we could and make the best possible speed and have the best possible results. And because one of them was married, and another one kind of had their own life, and another one had their own life, and there really wasn't much that we connected the way that we did, but there wasn't much connection outside of that. So I assembled a group assuming that the same sort of values were there, without actually taking the temperature of that. And I made a lot of mistakes in that first year. Around the concept of connection. I tried to create an artificial barrier between myself and the athletes, assuming that they were much more self-sufficient than they were. I didn't really necessarily take a look at what their needs were. And we, the group largely, I'd say I failed that first year. We didn't have nearly as much success as we assumed we were going to have based on the way that we had modeled it. I didn't put the values or the expectations in place in order to really assume what I wanted to happen was going to happen. And it wasn't until probably we started doing the coach enhancement program around that time that I really understood where I made that mistake and what I had to do when I came back to action that was going to make it different. And it was all about that connection piece. I didn't connect with those athletes the way that I felt I should. And the small changes that I made to start that season ended up being setting expectations, making sure everyone understood what we were going to do, put the what's okay, what's not okay, how to talk to me, how not to talk to me, what to expect from me, what not to expect from me, and had that conversation with them as what do you think is expected of me? What would you like to see from me? What do you need from me? I think those are the conversations that I left out in that first year that made us not as strong as we could be. That second year, I think, went super well. That second, third, even this year, we're going really, really well for that reason. And it all came down to connection. Now,
Yeah.
the next question is going to be, everyone's trying to stay connected through this COVID piece where groups are not able to train together. What do we do now when things get back to, we'll call it normal, even though we know it's not going to be normal?
Yeah.
What do we do now?
Cool. So here's what I think. There's two things you said here that I think is really important around this word connection. Words we tend to use, connection is not one of them in this space, is trust and respect. Those are measures of connection. The higher the trust, the higher respect, it means I'm okay and you're okay. Here's what's okay, here's what's not okay. And those become our behaviors and our agreements around how that is. So in the context of what you just asked me, I actually think our back to sport programming or the processes, there's a ton of operational thinking happening out there. But I guess my question to you was a couple weeks ago, and it has been to a lot of people, is there's the operational getting back to sport, but what is the relational reconnection game plan that people are thinking about? Because here's the thing, the world we live in, and this is your change 101 lesson, Mike, right? This is where we were talking a bit. There's 3 stages of change. There's an ending, there's what I call the messy middle, and then there's this idea of new beginning. And change happens really quickly when we minimize, not ignore, but we minimize how long we hang out in the sort of the left-hand side of this, and we spend way more time defining what does new look like, sound like, feel like, what are we going to do, what are we not going to do. And the sooner we start to have those conversations, it's like we invite people, it's like a magnet. I invite you to something better, bigger than where I feel or where I think right now. But for most of us, and this is the way our brains work, when things change, we want to hold on to it. We either resist it, we pretend it's not happening, we ignore it, but what we don't do is honor it. And I think, I guess for lack of a better term, I think that's the place and space is what, as coaches, can you do that says it's our new normal or whatever you want to call it, and what's the new beginning, and when we come back, what is it going to look like, sound like, and feel like? Because ultimately, when we ignore the emotions of what's happened during COVID, what we then do is we start to judge the thoughts and the behaviors of people, or we compare who's handling it better than not, versus appreciating. This is the most important thing we talked about and filmed actually something around it, is this idea of grief. So loss, we've all lost something, right? Through this whole process, the connections, the freedom, the way we thought things were going to go.
I'd say
Man, like
the comfort of your daily life, the comfort
totally.
of knowing you have a job, you have people you're going to see, giving someone a handshake or a hug. I mean, we lost a lot of things.
Like, I don't know if you've had this conversation with your athletes, but I had the privilege of talking to one of our national teams, and with the Olympics being canceled, it's like, okay, can I just ask the question? You don't have to tell me, you just need to say yes or no. But I said, how many of you are pissed off? Because now you're delaying going back to school, getting married, getting on with a different part of your life. Who knows what? Like, I said, I bet you're renegotiating with your families because now you have another 12 months before the games. And I think, you think about what's happening in our families and our communities right across the country. Like, people have lost jobs, people have lost family members. Like you say, everything's different. So my point here is, let's not hang out here and say, woe is me, but let's appreciate everybody's going to go through this loss process differently. And there is an opportunity for us as coaches to honor the loss and understand that as long as I surface some of what people are thinking or feeling and invite people to get to, here's what we're going to do differently or do better, or here's what it looks like when you come back, you help people move through it in their own way. Because one of the things I learned in this space during COVID was, there was a quote that I heard that I thought was really important, and it was by a grief expert, David Kessler, and his term was, judgment demands punishment. And I think what's really fascinating right now, in the spirit of being a role model, is how are we helping people just be wherever they are and not compare, well, so-and-so's doing better than you are, or at least you have this, or at least you have that. Like, I just think the comparative piece becomes actually a judgment. And I'm either judging myself for actually struggling with this, or I'm judging you because I'm like, I don't feel the way you do. Mm-hmm. And I think we have a role in that space.
Well, I think that also feels disconnection, though, as well, because you're looking at, I'm here, you're there, as opposed to we're in this together. And I think
Totally.
that really does
Thank you.
feel disconnection rather than a connection. And I think that's a
Uh-huh.
really dangerous thing when it comes to dealing with a group of athletes, if you're dealing in a club situation where you have parents, where you have board members, you have young teenage athletes that obviously aren't going to deal with things the same, or even coworkers that, one person's totally fine with it, another person's not. It's not, it really does fuel a disconnection when you start comparing and saying, I'm not here, but you're here, as opposed to saying, we're all here together and what can we do? How can I meet you where you're at?
There you go. That's the key. How do I meet you where you're at? Start where they are, not where you want them to be. And so that's the piece where if I know where you are, and then I invite you to come join me in this new normal or this new way we're going to train together, or get to a place where we can all show up and be our best and do our best. We have to appreciate that we're emotional creatures who think, not thinking creatures who feel. And this is where this empathy and curiosity space is where are you? How are you? What's going on? Those become really important questions as coaches that we can practice, that actually help show people, I see you, I hear you, I care, and let's move together towards back to sport, back to whatever, back to getting you back to where you were athletically. Who knows? It's going to be different for every person.
And that's a great transition into your slide right here, because that's actually what you're talking about. You're talking about empathy. So do you want to go through the definitions of empathy? And then I can actually share a story about how that made a huge change in my career.
So this is where this judgment demands punishment, or this is where empathy for me is how curious are you? Like, that's my simple definition. Like Teresa Wiseman's definition of it is one of my favorites, which is how do I, and I'm not going to read the slide, you can, but it's this idea of how do I name and notice and stay curious about what you're thinking, feeling, or needing right now with some compassion and judgment. I don't have to agree with it, but how do I feel with you so that in order to help you move forward, you feel understood? And I think that's really, as coaches, when I understand what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you want or need right now, and I get to share with you, well, here's what I think, here's what I feel, here's what I want or need. That's why there's 3 question marks there. Those are the 3 primary questions that oversimplify it. But when I understand that for you, that's when there's like data. We've made the invisible visible, because I can't read your mind, you can't read mine, and unless I ask you questions, I can't understand. So I'm curious about your story, because I think it's important we give it a live example.
Well, it's interesting because this really was my aha moment. And this was a big change for me as a coach. And this, I referred to that year after Rio. And this is when this took place. I had an athlete in that group um, whose demand wasn't really simple, but and in one way it was simple. It was demanding that I do, basically I do more work for him specifically. Different than what I was doing and different than what I was really honestly able to do or justify. And my
So
initial,
so just to confirm, he wanted you to coach harder or coach better than he thought you were.
yes, but
Okay.
also use resources that weren't necessarily justifiable to do it. Um,
Okay.
so my initial reaction again was, well, I got a group that's happy with doing what I'm doing, and this is the way I do it, and it's my way or the highway. So we actually had that conversation to say, if you're not happy with what's happening here, I can help you find another place to be. And that was my way of being helpful to him in that moment.
Can I just pause just 1 second? You just did something that was really cool.
Cross my arms.
Yeah. Did you notice that?
I did it on purpose.
Okay. Oh, you did. Okay. Because this is the thing that I think is really interesting, is sometimes when we bring up memories that are more negative and uncomfortable for us, we do things. So anyway, I'm glad you did that. Okay. Thank you.
That
Sorry,
was
keep
that was
going.
my symbolic creating a barrier.
That was very good,
But
because
also
we
trying to
do
show off my
that.
biceps was another reason I did that.
Okay.
um,
Sorry. Keep going with your story.
Not a problem. So our conversations initially were, I was going to let this athlete go and they were going to go somewhere else. And it wasn't until my boss at the time actually forced us to sit down and talk about what the issue was that we actually started understanding what the issue was. So this took many, many, many meetings. I mean, this took, I don't know, 7 or 8 meetings. They were an hour long and, resulted in people's hurt feelings. And a lot of standoffs, and we were completely at an impasse because this athlete was not willing to give an inch on what he thought needed to be done, and I wasn't willing to give an inch on what I was doing and what I believed should be done. And so it wasn't until the two of us actually took this aside and actually went for coffee. I believe we may have been in Mexico at the time. We went for coffee and sat down, and we reduced it to the simplest possible thing, was that, what is he asking me to do? It's to really, essentially, he was asking me to do my job, and he was asking me to do my job a little bit better so that he could reap the benefit of that. And when we reduced it to that, and I understood the basics of what he needed and why he felt he needed it, and it was a simple conversation where I just met him where he was at. And I really tried to simplify it. I tried to remove the judgment of it, because I think that was getting in the way for me. For me, the judgment was, you think I'm doing a bad job, or you don't think I'm doing a good enough job. Who do you think you are? And as soon as I removed that barrier, it was much, much, much easier to be able to settle in that conversation and say, okay, what is it that what do you need this for? What exactly is this going to help you with? And when he actually saw my guard get down and my shoulders relax and my arms unfold, then I think it was a little bit easier for him to explain to me what he wanted, without any judgment on my behalf either, not judging the job that I was doing, just saying what he envisioned. So it was actually that conversation where we both were able to relax and see it from each other's points of view. I'm not saying that the meetings that we had before were failing. They definitely started us in that direction, so we were in a position to be able to relax. But even thinking back on previous coaching experiences I've had, if I were willing to meet people where they were at, as opposed to just crossing my arms and saying, this is what it is, deal with it, I really do believe that it would have been better for me. It would have been better for the athletes. It would have been better for everybody. So this is one thing that I've learned over time, and it's not still not like a natural reaction for me. It has to be very conscious. But I think having to be able to take ego out of it and really take the judgment out of it is what really allows you to meet somebody where they're at. And I think that's the question that everyone needs to answer for themselves when going into these conversations is, what does this person need, or what do they want, and how can I help them achieve what it is they want?
And being clear too around, what do I need? Because I think one of the things that I love about your story is exactly that, unfolding my arms and being open. So I've got an awareness now of myself, which is part of EQ. It says, okay, I'm going to stay. I know what I'm thinking and feeling, but I'm going to stay open and stay curious. And in staying in that space, you were able to come up with a solution. But I think sometimes these kinds of, if I may, these kinds of conversations, sometimes people will hear it as, oh, well, then you became a doormat, or you did whatever they wanted. And I guess what I want to distinguish or make really clear, and I think your story does it well, it's not about caving in or letting somebody else drive how you show up. It's just understanding and meeting them where they are so that you can be your best as a coach. They can be their best as an athlete, and you have an agreement about how that's going to happen. That, for me, because as you've heard me say, expectations without agreements is an exercise in frustration for you and me.
Yeah, no, I agree. And actually, just a short prologue or epilogue to that story is that athlete stayed with me for an additional 2 years. We did excellent work, and it wasn't taxing for me necessarily. It was just learning and getting in the habit of doing something slightly different, changing the feedback mechanisms, changing the types of work we were doing. That athlete and I set a goal for Commonwealth Games in 2018, and that athlete, set a Canadian record, was a second faster than they'd ever been before, and missed out on a medal by less than 0.2 of a second. So, I mean, had we tried to do that without this agreement, or at least opening up and trying to understand each other a little bit better, we never would have gotten that far. Maybe that athlete could have gotten that far because they would have left the program and gone with someone else that understood them. But it really did bring out my best. I was able to help that athlete do what they needed to do, and it brought out that athlete's best because they were much better engaged. They were happier. They were able to do what they got. So I mean, it really was a win across the board for everybody.
That's awesome. So, I mean, quite often when we talk about this or when I teach this, empathy is really about these two skills: the quality of the questions you ask, so how curious you stay, and how present you are in your listening. So I always say things like, become the king or queen of the best questions. And usually I say to people, remove why from your vocabulary for the next 6 months and see what happens to the kind of the questions you ask. Why tends to deliver.
It gets people defensive because it almost,
Totally.
it implies that they've done something wrong and you're interrogating, the reason for them doing something wrong.
And the other thing I say around listening is listening with your face. So much of our conversation with people is tone of voice, body language, and facial expression. So it is important that we actually find ways to have these difficult conversations face to face. Anyway, I think this is the superpower of EQ. It's easy for me to know how I'm thinking or feeling, or most of the time, most of us know how we're thinking and what we want. But it's really this curiosity muscle and becoming the coach that's like the king or queen of the best questions. And what I hear you say and what we've worked on is, what are better questions, and how do you, like, I love your story. It's how do you uncross your arms and at least open up to understanding? So can we talk about this? Because this is the thing that you and I have spent a lot of time on.
Yeah, and this is actually one of my favorite things.
So I'm just going to share this with everybody. So I have a thing with 4-letter words. So the word wait is really about the power of pause in EQ. And this framework above and below the line represents the choice I have at any point in time, including the choice I have for you. So I actually quite often teach EQ with only this framework. And so let me just play with this. At any point in time, I am either above the line in my thinking or below the line. And depending on how aware I am of my thinking, it'll actually give me some indication of what emotions are driving that thinking. So below the line, and we're naturally hardwired and our brains are more threat focused versus reward focused, we tend to be more below the line. And the thing I say to people is, yourself or others are below the line when you're in, I use the acronym BED. You are blaming or complaining. That's the B. E is excuses dressed up as really good reasons. So a really great excuse a lot of people love to have right now is, I'm tired, I'm busy. Those are excuses dressed up as reasons because I really just don't want to deal with this. And the D stands for defensiveness and denial. But when I'm above the line, here's my acronym, and I have an OR. I'm open and optimistic. A is I'm going to own my half and be accountable and take action. And the R stands for I'm focusing not only on results, but ensuring that relationships matter too. So above the line is where EQ lives and breathes, because you get to be you, I get to be me. And below the line is usually where there's disconnection, unhealthy conflict, and lack of understanding. And so as we did in Coach Enhancement Program, a lot of the things we do is, if every coach in the country just started to pause, where am I thinking? Wait, where am I thinking? And then say, what do I need to shift if I'm below the line, where do I get to be above the line? And how do I then invite conversations of others above the line? Then I think what happens is we all move forward towards a new beginning or a better state than if we hung out below the line where there's blame, excuses, defensiveness, and denial.
I'd like to invite coaches watching to maybe think about times that they have been above and below. I mean, I gave an example of the way that I transitioned from below to above, but even today, with my IST team, obviously remotely, trying to discuss how things are going with the athletes from afar and what we're going to do differently as we go ahead. So I know that some of the IST staff is concerned about some of the compliance that should be happening with some of the athletes that isn't. I mean, most of the athletes are very good at it, but there are a couple of people that aren't quite there yet. And I think a lot of the responses are, well, things aren't going well. We need to change this now, and there needs to be some compliance. Whereas I'm able to be in a position now where I'm like, okay, that's great. Things are going well now, but how are we going to make things better for the future? How are things going to be better when we get back? What are we going to do differently than just enforcing that things have to be done? So how do we meet these people where they're at, find out what the reasoning is behind non-compliance, and figure out what the barriers are that are stopping them from doing it, and try to find an easier way to have that happen. And I think that's made a huge difference in my coaching right now. And I think it's made things a lot better. And I think it's kept athletes engaged, that rather than just hammering them with, you're not doing what I'm asking you to do it now, and trying to find, well, what's the barrier? What's in the way of you doing this? Is there a way that we can make this easier for you? Is there a way we can make it different? and even evaluating this. So when we get back, what are we doing now online that we can take to, our new future, right? Our new beginning. What can we do differently when we come back than what we're doing right now? I think that's a lot of above the line thinking. And I think the below the line thinking is just dwelling in that, this is not going to change. I can't wait till this goes back to normal. And I hear that a lot. And I
Yep.
just don't see that normal is going to happen. And I think there needs to be a shift to thinking above and trying to figure out how you're going to use this as an opportunity to make things better when we have an opportunity to train again and be together again.
So if we just summarize it, right? Below the line, we polish problems. Above the line is where creativity, solutioning, and connection happens.
Right.
Right. So to your point, like our brains are naturally more negative than positive. To bring our brains from a negative state to a positive, we actually have to give it choices. And so there's some science that says, if I just play the game of three, what are three possibilities? What are three questions I can ask? What are three good things I can think about this person right now, even though they're driving me crazy? Whatever that is, but the game of three at least brings us to neutral. And when you think about high performance, there's research that says, even in the context of how we communicate with each other, the highest performing teams have a ratio of positive comments to negative of 6-1. And so if you think about yourself as a leader and a coach, wouldn't that be interesting if I played that game? Or what are three ideas I can come up with right now to make this better? What would 6 look like? And how do I just start one at a time? But I think a lot of times we can play the victim, or we can feel powerless when we stay polishing our problems and looking for all the excuses or the reasons why we can't do something. And
this is a remarkably simple tool, but an incredibly powerful tool, because it really does become as simple as, where am I thinking? Am I thinking in a positive manner? Am I just polishing the problem? And I think just asking that question to yourself really makes a difference. And it really is a habit to get into, because it's not a natural way of thinking. It's actually disrupting the natural way of thinking. But if you can get in the habit of asking yourself, where am I thinking? Am I thinking above that line or below that line? And what's my choice here? I think that really does make a difference in your coaching on a daily basis. And it really does make a difference in your creativity and in your engagement with the athletes and results. It really does make a huge difference.
Here's what I'll say to you about this framework. I wish I knew who created it. I have no idea. It's certainly not me, but I've used it for years, and I teach it to kids as young as kindergarten, as well as teach it to coaches, as well as I teach it to senior leaders and CEOs across North America. It is the simplest, easiest way to start to teach EQ. And if you Google above and below the line, you'll find tons of different people who've blogged about it and whatever else. That I just say to coaches, it's a great framework. And it's really been the simplest way for us to sort of connect on, where am I and where are you? Are we above the line in this conversation or below the line? And even that language can start to shift the way we communicate. Anyway, for what it's worth, this is my favorite place and space, and the way you talked about it was awesome. I think we should probably kind of think about how we wrap this conversation up.
Yeah,
What do
I
you
was just
think?
going to say, I think we're running out of time, but I really, obviously this graphic kind of speaks for itself on the bottom right-hand side. I think that was when you were working with, that's a screen cap, I think, or a picture that you took from a whiteboard when you were working with another different national team.
So I had the privilege of speaking at CAC's Sport Leadership Conference in 2017, and they had somebody capturing some of my words. So here's the thing I believe. I go back to what we said in the beginning, and I say it in the work that I get to do and I feel privileged to do in our sports system. I believe coaches are amazing and important role models in our country and in the lives of our young people. And I fundamentally believe that the best coaches not only create amazing performance, but they actually help shape amazing individuals. And so this is something I said, and I believe. And I certainly feel very fortunate to work with coaches like you and others to say, how do I help you be better and better so you can help our next generation of athletes, coaches, and citizens become better and better. So,
if I can speak to that piece of the
yeah.
superpower, if you have a couple seconds, I think
Yeah.
one of the things that I'll reflect on quickly is that through the coaching enhancement program, the first thing that we do is a 360-degree um, evaluation, essentially, where athletes, coworkers, people from NSOs, people from PSOs, everybody does a quick evaluation, and you do an evaluation of yourself. So you're able to see the gap between where you think you are and where other people see you. And as I mentioned, this was taking place during that first year after Rio, where the connection wasn't quite there and the messages were unclear. And I thought I was doing a pretty good job simply on the merit that I was a good coach. And so I ranked myself fairly high on most things. And the feedback I got was I wasn't nearly as good as I thought it was. Actually, the gap was quite big. And that really, really annoyed me and depressed me. And obviously you have that denial and that barrier up because you don't feel like you fit. And I spent actually the first little bit of the coaching enhancement program in that position where I just didn't feel like this information is invalid because clearly I'm a good coach and this is telling me I'm not a good coach. So who the hell cares? Whatever people think, I'm doing a good job. And so I spent the first year almost in the coach enhancement program trying to find reasons that my thing was wrong, my evaluation was wrong. And it wasn't until we did the emotional intelligence question or evaluation with Judy that I actually realized that I did have a superpower. I did fit somewhere, and it wasn't just that my skills were getting better. And I really, again, do believe if I did that evaluation now, it would be much different than it was. But I really believed, and I think this was the catalyst to it, is that I had a superpower, and my ability to connect with people and my ability to actually understand and empathize wasn't being used nearly as much as it should be. And therefore I wasn't necessarily being myself. I was trying to be something that I wasn't. And I think that understanding really changed the way that I was doing. So this empathy piece and this emotional intelligence piece really is a missing, not necessarily missing, but a misunderstood and an underutilized concept in a lot of coaching mechanisms.
At the end of the day, when coaches learn how to share and show who they are and stay curious about who are you, this idea of uncrossing my arms that you did so lovely, this is where I think the magic happens, because you get to be you, I get to be me, and together we get to discover, in the context of the sport we play, what's possible, like what's really possible.
Yeah.
And I think more than ever, especially as we come back out of COVID, people are looking for hope, a goal, or something that anchors them, that feels real, that feels certain, that feels controllable in an environment for the last few weeks and obviously months ahead that is uncontrollable or unclear. And that's why I go back to coaches have this amazing ability, wherever you coach, to create clarity and help people be better and do better.
Absolutely. And like I said, through coaching, you have the ability to shape the future of our country. I really believe that meeting people where they're at brings out the best in them, and therefore you can create better leaders, you can create better athletes, you can make a lot more change by meeting people where they're at.
Well, think about how many athletes inspire other young kids to start in sport. And it was because a coach believed in them first and supported, hopefully in a positive way, them to becoming and believing in who they were. And in doing that, the ripple effect becomes pretty amazing, especially when it's done from a place of kindness, compassion, and great coaching. Okay, so here's some of the stuff back and forth that you and I have had that I'd love to sort of put out there to the coaches in the country who've taken the time to listen to us banter back and forth today. Is what does your reconnected coaching challenge? So, once you've dealt with all the logistics of how we're all going to do this and get back to sport, how are you going to choose to be better? What will you say better? What will you do better? And how are you going to make the training environment that you build feel better? And I think that's the kind of simple stuff and the simple questions. They're simple questions, but my hope is people start to really get thoughtful about and build their own self-awareness, so that when people come back, they're like, wow, I missed this, and look at what else is happening. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
Well, I do.
Or around what you're doing.
No, I do. I think there's some things to consider in the in the club program or even a national team program is that there are going to be people that rely on parents, and parents are probably dealing with this a lot harder than their athletes are, the children are. So people have lost jobs. I'm not sure if people are going to be able to afford to come back. And I think those conversations are going to be rather awkward. There's going to be some shame involved. And I really think that, we have to engineer a way, within your personality and within your ability to meet those people where they are and make sure that there's no, they're not being made to feel shameful that they can't come back or they're not ready to come back. Um, and there's been a lot of grief. I mean, there are people that have died in the meantime, and a couple people that I can think of right now that their coach has passed away in the last little bit. And how are they going to come back with a new coach? Are they going to want to feel that? There's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of emotion. And I just don't think that cutting off the emotional piece and dealing only with the logistics and this is our schedule and this is what we're going to do is going to cut it in the new tomorrow. I really do believe that people are going to have to do things better. They're going to have to say things better. They're going to have to do things better. And they're going to have to make that environment feel a lot safer and a lot more community. It can't all be raw positive performance and we're gonna qualify or we're gonna medal or we're gonna do whatever, we're gonna win whatever. That's a distraction. I think helping people get to that and monitoring how they're going to get to those things and what are they going to do to make their environment feel better and be better in order to achieve what they want to achieve. And I really think that can't be under thought of or under planned. I really do think that people need to think about how their environment's going to be better and what are they going to do in order to make that in a better environment and a more welcoming and a safer environment. Because again, people are going to be very concerned also about coming out of being in their homes and dealing in public again. There'll be a lot of uncertainty, and I think we need to make it a safe, certain place that people can feel like they want to be there and that they feel comfortable and safe being there.
So can I put you on the spot?
Absolutely.
So here's my question to you. What are 3 things for you out of this that you're going to do different or do better? That for your program or for you as a coach, like what are 3 things you've been thinking about? And what's one thing you're going to work hard at stop doing? So 3 things you're going to start doing to make all of this better, and one thing you think you want to stop doing.
Well, I have an unfair advantage because I actually have been thinking about this for quite some time, given the fact that we've had this conversation a number of times.
Okay, well that's good. Then I'm glad.
No problem. As I mentioned before, one of the things that we're trying to do with our IST team is I'm trying to challenge them to bring whatever it is they've learned from this experience or what they think they can learn from this experience to be a little bit better. Another thing we're doing is we're trying to reevaluate what our values and our team values and our expectations are around those values. So one of the things we recognized in the past is we've put values in from the athlete's perspective, but we've never done it from an IST or staff perspective. So there hasn't really been an expectation. There's been an expectation of how the athletes are to act, but there hasn't really been an expectation of how the staff or coaches or IST team are supposed to act.
Love it.
So we know what professionalism looks like for the athletes, but we haven't really considered what professionalism looks like from an IST or a coach perspective. We always just thought that was common knowledge. So we're actually going to investigate that. And the third thing we're going to do differently is try to take a look at a different way to use our monitoring that's a little bit less intensive or a little bit less invasive, I'll say, and a little bit less time consuming for the athletes, because we have found that that's one thing that's just demotivating them right now is like they do a workout and I got to get back on my laptop. I got to start it up. I got to log into this thing. I have crappy internet. I'm not going to be able to log. So we're looking at different ways that we can do things automatically that doesn't necessarily make it inconvenient or a pain in the ass for them to do. And one of the things I want to stop doing, one of the things I want to stop doing is trying to make it. I want to stop making things. I just said I want to make things a little bit more convenient. I want to stop making things ineffective because I'm trying to make them convenient. So, for example, I'm going to stop giving 14 different options for people to have a group meeting because I know it doesn't work for everybody, because I think that's a little bit more unclear. If I give 5 different options for 13 different people, there's going to be a lot of different answers of when people are free. So I think I'm just going to stop doing that. I'm going to start giving more advance notice and try to figure out a good time that works and just saying, this is what it is. Please clear your schedules to do that. I think that just creates a little bit more clarity and understanding.
Okay, I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, Mike, it still feels weird that we had slides and we were trying to do this, but but I hope for the coaches out there that two things. One is we only get better by the people we surround ourselves with, and two, practice makes permanent on this EQ stuff. And anyway, I'm curious once this gets out there what people got value from today. And I know personally, the last few years, sort of us learning together and learning with each other has been super fun and valuable. And hopefully, we've shared a model or a way of being that might be different for coaches out there.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm hoping that this is from a coaching perspective. This is what really makes a difference to me, is that disruption of the normal. So we're not just talking about coaching skills or the logistical skills. We're talking about actually how to operate as a coach and as a human being. And I think that's something that's really overlooked a lot of times. So this is a fairly unique thing. I don't think there are a lot of webinars that actually cover this kind of material. And actually pull it into a practical standpoint. So for those of you, I didn't actually introduce what I do, but I'm a para swimming coach. I work at the High Performance Center in Montreal. So I work with Paralympic medalists and Paralympic team members all year round. And the logistics of that is interesting. And I think that's a lot of the things that I talk about with other coaches, but this is one of the things that we rarely get to talk about. And we did do it a couple of years ago, I believe, at Trials. I think there was a coach education session, and it was really taken well. I think the feedback we got was fantastic, and everyone wanted to meet up with Judy, and everyone wanted to meet up with me afterwards to figure out how to get a hold of Judy and how I got linked up with her. So I think it's very interesting. This goes a long way. Coaches do find it valuable, but we would like to hear back from you. If you can contact Coaches Canada and let them know what you thought and other things you'd like to learn about, I think that would be great. And hopefully everyone liked this presentation, this type of presentation, this conversation. And hopefully we'll get to do it again from Judy and myself. So hopefully everyone enjoyed it, and thank you for joining us on Coach and Coach. Judy is my coach. We've worked together for many years, and hopefully many more years to come, because she's definitely made me a much better coach. And I think my encouragement to everybody watching is to find somebody that can give you that feedback and to be your coach, because it doesn't show weakness. It actually shows an interest in getting better. Any last words, Judy?
Thanks, Mike.
All right. Thank you for
You're
joining us.
awesome.
Hopefully we'll get to do this again.
Okay. Ciao.